Hello, I'm Johnny Cash.
Chills. Every time.
Every single time. That has to be the single most electrifying, but also somehow the most understated concert introduction in the history of modern music.
It's just so simple.
Yeah.
But it belongs to this man who was maybe the greatest walking, talking, singing paradox in all of American culture.
Right. We're talking about J.R. Cash, who the world knows as Johnny Cash, an icon who didn't just cross genres, he sort of consumed them. He was a country star, a rock and roll pioneer.
A folk hero, a bluesman, a gospel giant, all at once.
And what's so critical, I think, is how he just transcended eras. We're talking about an artist who sold, what, over 90 million records?
Upwards of 90 million. And he stayed relevant from his raw, early rockabilly stuff at Sun Records in the 50s.
All the way through dominating the charts in the 60s and 70s.
And then decades later, he has this massive critical renaissance covering Nine Inch Nails and Depeche Mode. It's just an unbroken chain of influence. It's wild.
It is a truly remarkable story of professional longevity. And he did it all without ever changing that voice, that distinct, deep, calm bass baritone.
Never.
So our mission today is to take this huge stack of source material we have, biographies, interviews, historical accounts, and really just unpack the dense, contradictory layers of his life. We want to find those aha moments.
Exactly. The moments that explain that tension between the rebellious outlaw image he built up.
And his really profound, devout Christian faith.
Yeah, we're focused on the complexity, his very public, very severe struggles with addiction, his unique brand of really radical activism for marginalized people.
And the stories, the profound personal stories behind those signature songs, I Walk the Line, Ring of Fire, and of course those legendary prison concert albums that just shifted the whole culture. It's the ultimate story of moral struggle and redemption, but it's played out not quietly in private, but on the biggest public stage you can imagine.
So let's get into it.
Let's unpack this journey, starting right at the foundation, the hardscrabble roots.
Okay, so his name, it feels like the perfect place to start because it really does set the stage for a man who was constantly redefining and reinventing himself.
He wasn't born Johnny Cash.
No, not even John. He was born J.R. Cash, February 26, 1932. In Kingsland, Arkansas.
Just the initials, JR.
Just the initials. And that detail is so significant. His parents couldn't agree on a name. His mother, Carrie, she wanted John. His father, Ray, wanted to name him Ray.
So JR was the compromise.
It was the compromise, which, if you think about it, speaks to a man caught between two competing forces right from the moment he was born. And that theme just dominates his entire life.
And that compromise, it runs right into a wall of bureaucracy pretty quickly when he enlists in the Air Force in 1950.
Yes, the military was not having it. They did not accept initials as a first name on official documents. You had to have a proper name.
So he was forced to choose.
He was. And so J.R. Cash officially becomes John R. Cash. And this little bureaucratic change is actually the first big step in creating his public identity. J.R., the poor farm boy from Arkansas, is now John R. Cash, the staff sergeant.
And then the final transformation, of course, is when he signs with Sam Phillips at Sun Records in 1955.
That's when he fully adopts the stage name, Johnny Cash. So you have this incredible timeline of his identity just in his name. J.R. the compromise, John R. the soldier, and Johnny Cash, the rebel and the star.
That military name change is a great marker for his move into the public eye, but if you really want to understand the soul of the man, you have to go back further, back to Dyes, Arkansas.
You absolutely do. The family moved there in 1935. He was just 3. This is the absolute depth of Great Depression.
And Dyes, this wasn't just any farm town. You mentioned this before we started. It was a New Deal colony.
Yep.
That's some heavy historical context for a childhood.
It's crucial context. Dyes was part of FDR's resettlement administration. It was designed to give poor, landless families, exactly like the Cashes, a fresh start, land they could work and eventually own.
So it represented hope.
Hope, yes, but also just relentless, backbreaking labor.
And the sources are so clear that the labor started incredibly young for him. From the age of 5, he's out in the cotton fields.
5 years old, working alongside his parents, his siblings, and he often talked about singing with them while they worked, just to get through the long hours in that awful heat.
Wow.
And that combination of intense physical work, deep poverty, and the sort of collective struggle of that era, it instilled in him this deeply ingrained empathy for the poor, for the working class, for anyone who was neglected.
So when he later sang about hardship, he wasn't just telling a story.
He was reciting his own autobiography. It's the direct source material for dozens of his songs. The flood narrative in 5 Feet High and Rising, That's a direct memory from Dies.
And this is where that hard reality of poverty intersects with a tragedy that would just scar him for the rest of his life. The death of his older brother, Jack, in 1944.
This is, I think, the defining trauma of his childhood, maybe his entire life. Jack was 2 years older, and JR was closest to him.
And he was working to help the family.
Exactly. Jack was working part-time at a high school wood shop, trying to earn a little extra money, and he was tragically cut by an unguarded table saw. He lingered for a week before he died.
That's just awful. And Cass later talked about this intense sense of foreboding the family had that morning. His mother even begged Jack not to go to work, to go fishing with JR instead.
But Jack, he was so committed to his faith, and he knew the family needed the money, so he insisted on going.
The guilt from that must have been immense.
It never left him. The burden of that loss, the guilt of not being there,
Wow.
He spoke about it often, later in life. Sometimes he would get choked up on stage, talking about how he was certain he would be meeting his brother in heaven.
That one event just fuses everything together, doesn't it? The economic struggle, the personal loss, and this intense need for faith and redemption.
It absolutely establishes that duality of the sinner battling for salvation that would define his entire life, public and private.
And musically, the seeds are all being planted right there in Dice. His mother and a friend taught him guitar when he was about 12.
And the influences were, just like his life, completely split. On one hand, you have this devout, traditional gospel music. He later honored that with the album My Mother's Hymn Book.
But on the other hand, the sources point to a really surprising influence. Traditional Irish folk music.
Irish folk music, right.
Mm-hmm.
In rural Arkansas in the 1940s. It seems so out of place.
Where did he even hear that?
It was from the radio. Specifically, it was performed every week by the tenor Dennis Day on the Jack Benny radio program.
So you have this young J.R. Cash. He's working in the cotton fields, and he's absorbing the spiritual power of hymns and the storytelling of these old Irish tunes.
Exactly. And, it's interesting. He actually started out with a high tenor voice. It only later deepened into that famous, resonant, low bass baritone that became his signature.
Which brings us to his military service. This part of his life is such a crucial, almost shocking detour into Cold War intelligence.
It's an incredible period. He enlists in the Air Force in 1950, makes it to staff sergeant, and after meeting Vivian Liberto in San Antonio during basic training, who was the first great love of his life,
Right.
he gets stationed in Landsberg, West Germany for 4 years. This is during the Korean War era.
And his job wasn't just anything. It was highly specialized. He was a Morse code operator for the U.S. Air Force Security Service. His specific task was intercepting Soviet Army transmissions.
Which puts him right on the front lines of the Cold War intelligence game.
And here's the detail from the sources that just blows my mind every time I read it. Cash was said to be the first American to learn the news of Joseph Stalin's death in March of 1953.
It's astonishing, isn't it? That intelligence came directly through the Soviet Morse code transmissions that he was personally decoding.
The future voice of the American underclass is the guy confirming the death of a global dictator, the focus and isolation that job required. It must have been intense.
It had to be. But it probably mirrored the discipline he'd need later to manage a massive touring career. And even then, the music never stopped. While he was over there, he formed his first proper band.
The Landsberg Barbarians.
Great name. It was his earliest attempt to really apply that creativity in a performance setting.
And while he's building this musical foundation overseas, he's also building his personal foundation back home. He and Vivian Liberto exchanged thousands of letters while he was gone.
That correspondence is its own kind of dedication. So he gets honorably discharged as a staff sergeant in July of '54, comes back to Texas, marries Vivian immediately.
So John R. Cash comes home. He's a veteran, he's a husband, and he's got this conviction that he can lead a band and command a room. It was time to start building the legend.
So in 1954, he and Vivian, they moved to Memphis, Tennessee. He's still got these sort of practical ambitions, studying to be a radio announcer.
But he's paying the bills selling appliances door to door.
Exactly. But at night, that musical foundation he built in Germany really starts to solidify. He starts playing with two mechanics he met, a guitarist named Luther Perkins and a bassist, Marshall Grant.
The Tennessee Two.
Who later become the Tennessee Three when W.S. Holland joins on drums. And their sound, born out of this trio, it was just instantly recognizable.
It was so distinctive, the sources describe it as that train-like chugging guitar rhythm.
The famous boom, chicka boom, it was so sparse and percussive and just driving. The boom was that steady, muted downbeat from Luther Perkins. He'd wedge a piece of paper under the strings of his Fender Telecaster to get that sound.
And the chico was the syncopated upstroke. It's such a technical detail, but it's so critical. It made his music sound industrial, like the freight trains he loved to sing about.
Which links right back to his childhood. The themes of travel, poverty, escape, it was all there in that rhythm. And that's the sound he brought with him when he finally got the courage to audition for Sam Phillips at Sun Records.
Phillips, of course, was the kingmaker. He'd already discovered Elvis.
And Cash was desperate. But he immediately runs into that religious barrier that had been with him since he was a kid. He auditions with gospel songs.
And Phillips, who was focused purely on what would sell, just rejects them flat out.
He did. And there's that infamous rumor that Phillips told him to go home and sin, then come back with a song I can sell. Now, Cash later denied Phillips used those exact words.
But the message was clear.
The message was clear. Phillips wanted rockabilly and country. And Cash delivered. He adapted his style and broke through with hits like Hey Porter, Cry, 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 and of course, Folsom Prison Blues, which hit the country top 5.
And then the huge one, I Walk the Line. That goes to #1 country and even cracks the pop top 20.
He very quickly became Sun's most consistently selling artist. But he never quite fit the mold. And that early success leads to one of the most famous impromptu sessions in music history, the $1 Million Quartet.
December 4th, 1956. This is pure rock and roll mythology.
It is. Elvis, who was already a megastar, just drops by the studio while Carl Perkins is recording. Jerry Lee Lewis is there on piano, and Cash is there too. And Sam Phillips, sensing history, just lets the tapes roll.
What's so fascinating to me is that this session, which is seen as this, foundational moment for rock and roll, was actually dominated by gospel songs. Almost half the recordings are gospel.
That's a great point. And Cash later wrote about how he felt almost intimidated in that room. He stood farthest from the microphone and sang in a higher pitch, just trying to blend in with Elvis.
It's such a revealing detail, isn't it, about his constant struggle for identity, even when he's in a room with giants.
Absolutely. But despite all that success, he felt stifled at Sun. He leaves for Columbia Records in 1958, which was a huge move that would define the next 30 years of his career.
So why the split? It seems like it was both creative and financial.
It was. First, Phillips stubbornly refused to let him record gospel, which for Cash was just non-negotiable. Second, the money. He was only getting a 3% royalty rate when the standard was closer to 5%.
He felt shortchanged.
And on top of that, he felt Phillips was putting all his energy into promoting Jerry Lee Lewis.
So he bolts to Columbia, has huge hits like Don't Take Your Guns to Town. He finally gets to record his gospel albums. But Phillips had such a backlog of unreleased Cash material
that for years, until 1964, Cash was in this bizarre position of having new releases coming out on 2 major labels at the same time. Talk about market confusion.
It speaks to his incredible output, but that success also coincided with his life just starting to spiral into darkness.
Which brings us to the Man in Black image.
Which ironically started out as just pure pragmatism.
Right. Early on, they nicknamed him The Undertaker for the black clothes. But he admitted he just chose black because it was easier to keep looking clean on long tours.
But that practicality vanished as the rebellion and the chaos took over, and it was all fueled by addiction. As his touring schedule got more and more grueling, he started drinking heavily and got hooked on a really dangerous cocktail of prescription drugs.
The main ones were amphetamines, specifically dexedrine, to stay awake for days on end.
And then barbiturates, like Equinel, to knock himself out and sleep.
It's a vicious cycle. He even lived with Waylon Jennings for a while in Nashville in an apartment they called the Den of Iniquity because of their shared amphetamine use. But that internal chaos was also feeding his art.
It sure was. Take Ring of Fire from 1963. Massive crossover hit. The origin story for that song is just steeped in contradiction.
That's the perfect word. Cash always claimed that the signature mariachi horn part came to him fully formed in a dream.
But his first wife, Vivian Liberto, she had a much different, much more cynical story. In her memoir, she claimed Cash gave June Carter half the songwriting credit for purely financial reasons, a business decision.
So you've got this song that's all about falling into the temptation of love, but its very creation is tangled up in personal and financial deceit. That duality is the essence of his public life.
While he's crafting this romantic outlaw image, his life is just descending into a series of real-life but mostly minor legal problems.
Right. He cultivated the image, but it's so important to remember he never served a real prison sentence. He was jailed 7 times, but only held overnight for misdemeanors.
Let's highlight the two most famous incidents. First, the Starkville incident in 1965.
May 11th, 1965. He gets arrested in Starkville, Mississippi for trespassing. And what was he doing? He was picking flowers late at night on private property.
It sounds almost comical.
It does. But he spent the night in jail. And that experience directly inspired his song, Starkville City Jail.
And then later that same year, the one that really showed the public how bad the addiction crisis was, the El Paso arrest.
October 4th, 1965. He's arrested by a narcotics squad. They suspected he was smuggling drugs from Mexico. And they found this shocking amount of pills in his guitar case. 688 dexedrine and 475 Equinol tablets.
An incredible quantity. But because they were prescription, he got off with a suspended sentence.
He did, but the sheer number of pills just laid bare the depth of his physical dependence.
And if you need one single story that captures the pure recklessness of this period, it has to be the infamous 1965 camper fire.
This event is just astounding. He's on a fishing trip in Los Padres National Forest in California. His camper catches fire, and it leads to this massive forest fire that burns 508 acres. The foliage off 3 entire mountains.
And the biological impact was catastrophic. It drove off nearly all of the endangered California condors from that refuge, 49 out of 53 of them.
And Cash's response in court just cemented his outlaw legend, but not in a good way. When the judge questioned him, Cash, high and defiant, gave that infamous quote,
"I don't care about your damn yellow buzzards."
Unbelievable. The federal government sued him, and he eventually had to settle for over $82,000. It's such a destructive chapter.
And all this destruction finally forces a turning point. He divorces Vivian Liberto in 1966, citing his drug abuse, adultery, and of course, his deepening relationship with June Carter.
The final breaking point seems to be his last arrest in 1967 in Lafayette, Georgia. After a car accident, police find him with prescription pills again.
And he was desperate. The sources say he tried to bribe the deputy, who just refused money.
He spent the night in jail. But the real change came from a long, serious talk he had with the sheriff, Ralph Jones. Cash himself credited that conversation, that moment of human kindness, with helping him finally choose to get his life together.
So after that, the Carters June, her mother Maybelle, her father Ezra, they all move into his mansion for a month to help him detox.
And June was unwavering. He proposed to her on stage in London, Ontario in February '68. They married a week later. But she insisted it would only happen if he cleaned up.
Now, here's a critical detail that really highlights the long shadow of addiction. Despite getting married in '68, he didn't completely stop using amphetamines then.
No, he didn't get fully clean until 1970, inspired by the birth of their son, John Carter Cash. And even that wasn't the end. He had a 7-year clean period, then relapsed in '77, and again badly in '83. Multiple public rehab stints.
Betty Ford Clinic, Loma Linda. June stayed with him through it all, flushing his pills down the toilet.
He had that chillingly self-aware quote later. "I was taking the pills for a while, and then the pills started taking me." And that relentless cycle, sin, struggle, relapse, and redemption is what defined the next most famous stage of his career.
Right. If the first half of the 60s was his internal crisis, the late 60s and 70s were about turning that experience outward, turning that personal darkness into a public mission. And the venue for that was the American prison system.
He'd been playing prisons for a while. His first big one was at San Quentin back in 1958. This was never a PR stunt for him. It was a genuine affinity.
Yeah. And the recordings were just monumental. Johnny Cash at Folsom Prison in '68 and at San Quentin in '69, they weren't just albums, they were cultural events.
Huge. Both hit #1 on the country charts. And San Quentin crossed over and topped the pop charts, too. It had that huge novelty hit, A Boy Named Sue.
In 1969, Johnny Cash was so big he was actually outselling the Beatles. He sold 6.5 million albums that year. That's staggering cultural dominance. And it came from a recording made inside a prison.
And his commitment wasn't just in the U.S. He performed at a prison in Sweden in '72, released an album from it. He was sending a clear message. These people are human. They deserve to be seen.
This commitment to the marginalized extended beyond prisoners, too. He had this complex patriotism. He was a huge supporter of his nephew, a decorated naval officer.
Yes, Captain Roy Outlaw Cash Jr. And there's that great detail about the lost concert in 1975, a private show he did for a military audience at the Naval War College. He was fiercely anti-establishment on social issues, but also deeply respectful of military service.
And nowhere is that activism more visible than in his fight for Native American rights. This was incredibly controversial for a country star in the 1960s.
It was. Mainstream country was becoming more and more conservative, and here he was singing songs about Indian tragedy and settler violence. In 1964, he releases the concept album Bitter Tears, Ballads of the American Indian.
It was a history lesson set to music. Stories of the Pima, Navajo, Lakota, Seneca peoples. Many of the protest songs were written by the folk artist Peter Lafarge.
And the industry pushed back hard. Columbia, his own label, thought it was too radical. Radio stations refused to play the single, The Ballad of Ira Hayes, calling the subject unappealing.
They tried to silence him, and this is where Cash showed his power. He fought back. He took out a full-page ad in Billboard magazine.
A scathing ad. He just called them out. DJs, station managers, owners, wear your guts. He called the song Strong Medicine and compared it to the struggles in Birmingham and Vietnam.
And it worked. The song ended up reaching #3 on the country charts. He literally forced the conversation.
And his commitment was real. In 1966, he was formally adopted by the Seneca Nation's Turtle Clan. He was putting his actions where his mouth was.
He used his biggest mainstream platform, The Johnny Cash Show, to continue that work. The show ran from '69 to '71, filmed at the Ryman.
And he used that show to radically diversify the voices people were hearing on TV. The guest list is incredible. Louis Armstrong, Neil Young, James Taylor. He gave Linda Ronstadt her first TV appearance.
And most famously, he hosted the reclusive Bob Dylan. He was instrumental in pulling Dylan back into the public eye. They even sang a duet.
And the show gave us that legendary moment of defiance. Network execs wanted him to censor a line in Chris Christopherson's song Sunday Morning Comin' Down. The line was, "I'm wishing, Lord, that I was stoned."
And Cash just refused outright. When the show aired, he made a point of singing the line exactly as written. It defined his public integrity.
It perfectly embodied that man in black persona. By the early 70s, the black wardrobe wasn't just practical anymore. It was a statement.
He defined it in the song Man in Black. He said he wore it in mourning for the suffering of the world. The poor, the prisoners, those affected by the Vietnam War.
He said he stopped wearing black when things got right. He added, "Apart from the Vietnam War being over, I don't see much reason to change."
That conviction led to his most famous political confrontation, performing for President Richard Nixon at the White House in 1970.
Nixon's staff had a very specific politically charged request list. They wanted Okie from Muskogee and Welfare Cadillac, songs with anti-hippie and anti-black sentiments.
And Cash simply refused to play them. He claimed he didn't know them well enough, but really he knew playing them would be dishonest to his beliefs. Instead, he performed his protest songs, The Ballad of Ira Hayes, What is Truth, and, very pointedly, Man in Black.
It was a direct, peaceful confrontation with power. And Nixon, to his credit, kind of got it. He joked later that he learned, you don't tell Johnny Cash what to sing.
It just crystallized his public identity, didn't it? A conservative Christian who is also a radical activist. It's that paradox again.
But despite his cultural significance, by the early 80s, the hit songs were drying up. His career at Columbia was stagnating, even though he'd been inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 1980.
The 80s were a rough decade for him. Creative frustration and serious physical setbacks, including the ostrich attack in 1983.
It sounds like a joke, but it was horrifyingly real. He was on his farm, an ostrich kicked him, and it caused a severe abdominal injury.
And the surgery, the painkillers, it led to another relapse into addiction, a major setback.
It was. But professionally, he found a lifeline. He teamed up with 3 other giants to form the Highwaymen.
Cash, Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, and Chris Christopherson, one of the biggest supergroups in country music history.
And they were a huge commercial success. They released 3 hit albums. It was vital for him. It kept him touring, recording, and relevant, even when his solo stuff wasn't charting.
His frustration with Columbia, though, it led to that infamous, bizarre moment in his career. The novelty song, The Chicken in Black, in 1984.
The song is about his brain being transplanted into a chicken. It's deeply weird.
Yeah.
The popular story is that he recorded it as a protest against Columbia.
But the sources, particularly his biographer Robert Hilburn, say that's not quite right. He says Cash actually loved the idea at first. He even filmed a comedic music video for it, dressed in this ridiculous superhero costume.
What stopped it was Waylon Jennings. He saw the video and told Cash he looked like a buffoon. And Cash was so mortified, he demanded Columbia pull the single. It was less a protest and more just a deeply embarrassing misstep.
So after that, he finally left Columbia in 1985, and he turned heavily toward religious works. He He published his only novel, Man in White, about the Apostle Paul. He even recorded an audio version of the entire New Testament.
He was really trying to ground himself spiritually. But his recording career was basically flat until this unlikely figure from the complete opposite end of the music world stepped in to resurrect him, Rick Rubin.
And this is where the great final act begins.
After a failed stint at Mercury Records, Cash was considered a relic. But Rick Rubin, who was famous for producing rap and hard rock, signed him to his American Recordings label.
And Rubin's vision was just radical in its simplicity. He stripped everything away.
Everything. He had Cash record the album American Recordings acoustically, mostly in his own living room, with just his guitar. The focus was entirely on the voice and the story.
It was completely unexpected, and it reintroduced Cash to a whole new generation. It won a Grammy for Best Contemporary Folk Album. It proved that authenticity beats production every time.
And this renaissance led to all these incredible collaborations. He sang on a U2 album. He worked with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers on the album Unchained, which won him a Grammy for Best Country Album.
The irony. He finally wins Best Country Album after challenging the genre for his entire career.
But this recognition came just as his health started to seriously fail. In 1997, he was misdiagnosed with Shy-Drager syndrome, and doctors told him he had about 18 months to live.
That was later corrected to autonomic neuropathy from diabetes, but it still basically ended his touring career.
He was in and out of the hospital, but he just became more and more prolific in the studio. And that intensity led to American the Fourth. The man comes around in 2002.
Which had those stunning final recordings, his covers of Depeche Mode's Personal Jesus and, of course, Nine Inch Nails' Hurt.
Trent Reznor, who wrote Hurt, said he was skeptical at first. But when he heard Cash's version and saw the video, he said he was just blown away. He called it a magnificent achievement.
And the video for Hurt became this absolute cultural touchstone. It juxtaposed the frail, aging Cash with images of his youthful chaos. It earned him a Grammy and an MTV VMA nomination.
He was the oldest artist ever nominated for a VMA. And Justin Timberlake, when he won that year, he used his acceptance speech to demand a recount, saying Cash deserved it more than anyone. It was this incredible validation from the modern music world.
But then, tragedy. On May 15, 2003, June Carter Cash died. She had been his anchor for decades.
He was shattered. But she had made him promise to keep working. So he did. He recorded 60 songs in his final 4 months. He said music was the only reason he had left to live.
His last public performance was just heartbreaking. July 5th, 2003. Before singing Ring of Fire, he read this moving statement about June.
He said, "The spirit of June Carter overshadows me tonight. She came down for a short visit, I guess, from heaven to visit with me tonight, to give me courage and inspiration like she always has. It's just so raw and vulnerable."
He died less than 4 months later, on September 12, 2003. His very last completed song, recorded just a few weeks earlier, was Engine 143, a final, perfect coda.
When you look at his entire life, his cultural status is just unparalleled, and it's reflected in that unique triple crossover recognition he received.
Right. He's one of the only artists inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. That spread of influence, from sacred to rebellion, that's the man right there.
And his influence went so far beyond just music. The sources make this fascinating connection to Bob Dylan. Cash's willingness to use an electric guitar at folk festivals and his defense of artistic freedom really influenced Dylan's own controversial decision to go electric.
And his presence just continues. All the posthumous releases, American V, American 6. There's a new compilation of old demos announced for 2024. The work just keeps coming.
His life was the ultimate paradox. The man who wore black to mourn suffering was also responsible for a massive forest fire. The man who battled addiction for decades was also an ordained minister who wrote a novel about the Apostle Paul.
He admitted it himself. He called himself a deeply complicated and contradictory man and the biggest sinner of them all. But the public never saw him as a fraud. They saw him as authentic.
And what stands out is the enduring love for this intensely flawed figure, someone who constantly battled his demons, who relapsed, who struggled with guilt, but at the same time used his fame to champion the marginalized.
Which brings up a final thought for you to chew on. Johnny Cash wore black as this explicit moral statement, mourning until things got right. Given the public chaos of his own life and his eventual triumph, what does his journey tell us about our cultural need for authenticity? Does a great public advocate? Do they need to have this profound, visible, personal struggle against darkness for their message of redemption to really hit home?
It's a great question. Does the struggle validate the message?
Something to think about.